Virtual reality, a concept created in the early 90s by Nintendo with their Virtual Boy that has been revolutionized in the modern age. It's been an idea and a concept longer than anyone who's been watching this is alive. But quickly, what is VR? It's a toaster with a cool high quality screen and some cool lenses. You strap that to your face and then using cameras or invisible lasers tracks your head movements alongside your matched pair of fancy Wii remotes. VR as a concept has actually originated from 1935, where some nerd wrote about a pair of spectacles in a book called Pag Magdalene Spectacles. This book has the first mention of a traditional VR headset, as it's a pair of spectacles you strap to your face, and you'll have all your senses taken over by the headset, making you feel like you're in the movie. Did I mention these spectacles were made for movies, as games weren't allowed because they were too fun back then? Story is, you slap on some spectacles on your face and then you are the main character of whatever movie you're watching. You can interact with the other characters in the movie. If you still don't understand what I'm saying, think of any Walking Dead Telltale game, or any story game, but you're actually there. The Sword of Damocles, created in 1968 by Ivan Sutherland and his student David Sproul. The Sword of Damocles got its name from Ivan Sutherland. Joking around, it said it looked like a giant overhead cross. Do I get what he means? Yeah. I can't find anything about the display, only finding out that it can only show basic wireframes and only has head tracking, which means you can rotate your head, but you cannot move it forward in any direction. Sun Tzu. Now, in the great years of 1970 to 1990, where I still wasn't born, people were adopting VR, and by those people, I mean people that mean straight business. They used it for extremely basic medical training and flight simulation, automobile industry design, and military training. Now, one of the ones I didn't mention was NASA, because I actually need to talk about them, because they developed the AMES View. Now, the headset names are just getting worse, but this headset was more similar to what we have today. It's just a bit more jagged, less refined, and actually required a NASA PC. But it was never intended for customer use, because it was expensive and required an actual NASA PC, as I just mentioned. But it was an experiment to test concepts of showing information visually to pilots and astronauts using computer-generated visuals. But in the end, it wasn't really used in live environments because it lacked visual quality and was hard to get set up. Going on to the 80s, the term virtual reality, or VR, was starting to get used in more and more, with several devices getting marketed around VR, like the Data Glove by VPL. That was just a fancy power glove with better finger controls. It gets a C tier. Speaking of the Power Glove, it was $75 on release, and it would be $198 today, and only supported 3 games on launch, and the controls were described as obtuse and impractical for every other console, so it gets a D tier for effort. Then, Atari, the people famous for the best game ever,
Boom, bam, bop, bada bop, boom, pow.
Then in 1983, they closed that lab due to the video game crash, because everyone stopped caring about video game consoles in favour of computers.
There's no games on it!
From the 1990s onwards, VR headsets were now being made for consumers, with the first one being made by Sega, and their headset named the Sega VR. The Sega VR was similar to most modern headsets we have today, with built-in headphones, inside-out tracking, but this one only having 2 DOF, which means you can move your head up and down, but you can't do it both at the same time. These headsets were shown off at several trade shows, but in the end they never got released, probably due to technical issues and probably price issues. Then a company called Virtuality started selling several types of VR arcade cabinets that used Sega VR headsets, and used a joystick for controls. Not a controller, a joystick. A singular joystick you use to move about a 3D space. This has to be one of the worst controllers, so it gets an F. These machines had games, so they're beating the PlayStation even back then.
There's no games!
But the games are the usual games you'd find on any platform. A player versus everything where you fight robots. A player versus player with a pterodactyl. An adventure game. And finally, the mandatory puzzle game. Now, these headsets were not even cheap either, being around 73,000 Freedom Dollars, or about 1,973 in Rainbow Vinyls. Then, in 1992, we finally started making the first virtual reality movie, and that VR movie was just called It was created by Nicholas Stenger, and in this movie, you would use a data glove and a pair of high-resolution goggles. Which ones? What's the name of it? I don't know, you tell me. The movie featured colourful environments, lasting from 30 seconds to 2 minutes and 30 seconds per shot, where the angels would come up to you and speak to you and interact with you, and that how much you interact with them would progress the story. Now, actually looking at the movie, it was definitely colourful and vibrant, and it looks something straight out of Cruelty Squad. You just need to slap some of the HUD on, and boom, Cruelty Squad 2. Then, after making a rough VR movie, they had to make the next step, of course, which was mixed reality.
He did?
Where you could basically just see through the headset and interact with VR stuff. This headset was named Virtual Fixers, and this headset was made by the US Air Force Labs, and for once didn't use a data glove, but instead used an upper body exoskeleton that linked up to a robot. That's movements corresponding to how you moved were able to move physically real 3D objects through the robot. Finally, Sega released their own headsets for arcades called the VR1, and was developed in conjunction with Virtual A. They were mostly featured in Japan and in some other places in the world, but it only had one game where you shoot things from inside a ship using triggers on each side of each player. Nintendo released another VR product, so you know it's gonna suck. But how bad did they drop the ball? We'll see after this ad from the Virtual Boy.
It came from the third dimension, with its own voice. Leg. There's a day one up. It needs your eye. Boy, now in 3D.
See, after the release of the Virtual Boy, their own VR headset that obviously didn't work with the Power Glove, instead a weird looking controller that didn't look the cleanest or the most comfortable, but it was usable, so it worked. I guess it's D tier because it's usable. But that wasn't even the worst part. It was the colors. Try and guess what colors they used. It wasn't black and white, it was 4 shades of red. And it stood out, but not in a good way. But it worked, letting you at least see the game whilst giving you mild headaches. In the end it failed, because the price was around $178 on release, or $370 nowadays, and was panned by critics because it was uncomfortable and it didn't actually strap to your head. Then, there was nothing. No new headsets, or anything VR for that fact. Now, do I blame the Virtual Boy for the fall of VR after 2000s? No. But most of the blame was there for the Virtual Boy. But the more reasonable thing to say was technology just wasn't there yet. We couldn't make super advanced VR stuff because we just didn't have the technology for it. But that would change, because this is the 2000s, and we're in 2025 now, so... After a decade of no VR innovations or anything, one man came along and revived the concept of VR. Palmer Luckey, a complete nerd, judging by how around 16, he built his own computer, and then paired it with 6 monitors. What would you do with that absurd amount of monitors? I know I would do. Screen 1 is a game. Monitor 2, that's Spotify. Monitor 3, maybe Discord. Monitor 4, Subway Surfers. Monitor 5, OBS. And finally, Monitor 6, a picture of my goat, Blaziken, as motivation. Now this nerd made a VR headset in 2010 when he was 17 called the Oculus PR1, and was built from the shell of another VR headset, and was only capable of rotational tracking, or 3DOF, and had 90-degree field of vision, or the amount of screen you could see from the lenses. Then, over the years, he began experimenting and refining different types of prototype VRs, and after 6 generations of tinkering and posting results for random VR enthusiast websites, he created the Oculus Rift DK1 in 2012, and he intended this VR to become a make-it-yourself kit, eventually launching a Kickstarter to fund the project, but in the end they eventually came out pre-made. Now, whilst Palmer was experimenting with VR, on August 16th, 2011, a small book came out. You probably never heard of it, but it's called Ready Player One. Now, I'm not going to explain the whole book to you because 1, you've probably already seen it, and 2, you probably don't care. But in short, life sucks, so you put on some VR equipment and go to the metaverse. This book showed where people wanted to go and what could be possible with VR, as they had whole omnidirectional treadmills where you could run on the spot and wouldn't go anywhere, and haptic suits, wherever you felt in the game or whatever you were doing, you would feel it in real life. And I even talked about where you can basically do anything, anywhere, as anything. or in short, the Oasis equals the metaverse.
Hooray!
Going back to the Kickstarter, it was an immediate success, getting its goal of 250,000 in under 24 hours. And it didn't stop there, because by the end of the campaign, it had $2,437,429, or about 71,689 OK Computer vinyls. So, in 2013, they shipped out the first batch of Oculus Rift DK1s, and it received very well, with the only complaints being that the design was a bit boxy, and there was a lack of software support. But for a headset that was the first one in 10 years, it's gonna lack some software support. Then, in 2013, another big player in VR came along, and it was Valve.
Come on, Gordon, crank that thing.
They supported Oculus Kickstarter by adding basic VR support to the most famous game, TF2. But Oculus gave them the idea to make their own VR headset, so they created the Steam site. This headset was able to be tracked over long distances using VR lighthouses that shoot lots of infrared lights that are able to calculate your precise location and then convert it into a 3D space. Now, this headset doesn't look the best, but in the end, it was a prototype, so who cares? Then, HTC saw all this cool VR stuff, so in collaboration with Valve, they released their first proper VR controllers in 2015, called the HTC Vive Wands. Now, I have some experience with these controllers, and they are fine. The trackpad sucks, but they're fine. Good luck trying to walk in a straight line though. So they get a C tier. And then finally, in 2014, Sony announced Project Morpheus, which was a VR for the PlayStation, and Facebook finally bought Oculus for $3 billion. I'm not saying how many Radiohead vinyls you can buy with that, because you could just buy Tom York at that point. In 2015, Google released their VR, the Google Cardboard, that created the worst trend in VR so far, because all it was essentially the Oculus DK1, but made out of cardboard and used the screen off your phone. But also, in the same year, HTC, to match their brick of a controller, they released the Brick, also known as the HTC Vive 2016. Now, I can talk about this headset because it's currently strapped on my face. And what do I have to say about it? It's still good today, but slightly pixelated. But my favourite part about this headset is the build quality. You could probably throw this headset at the wall, and the wall would have more damage than the headset. It's pretty much... The HTC Vive is one of the first modern headsets to be a consumer headset, priced at only $800, which is a lot, but you do get two HTC Vive Wands, the headset that's still really good 10 years later, and two lighthouses, or base stations, that are still supported now and by other modern headsets, but it's discontinued. People loved this headset, for good reason. It was the first headset announced with full room tracking, meaning you could move your head any way with very little margin of error. Then, Oculus released their headset around the same time, called the Oculus Rift CV1. This headset also had tracking similar to the HTC Vive, with using a couple lighthouses, or as Oculus called them, constellation camera tracking sensors. It's a lighthouse, but instead of communicating wirelessly with the PC, you had to run two USB cables around your room, but it did come with an Xbox controller. Although it's a nice controller, it's the only controller I can use with a console, but in the end it's still an Xbox controller with no new bells or whistles, so that's why I get to B.
I'm tweaking!
Finally, the PlayStation Project Morpheus released for the PlayStation 4, and its final name is the PlayStation VR. I've also tried it and the controllers are nice, because they were inconvenient and uncomfortable, and I'm fully convinced an actual Wii remote would have worked better. It had a miserable head strap, the tracking is barely usable due to having one base station that tracked the lights on the VR kit itself, and it would only work in one direction. But it was $500 and didn't even come with headphones, but removable earphones that would go right into your ears. I hate them.
Release me!
Then the Oculus Rift CV1 got its controllers after a good while, and they're a B. Then, with the great success of the awful Google Cardboard, they decided to go all out, making a usable phone VR called the Google Daydream. It was only available for new Google phones and was discontinued 3 years later, with D-tier controllers as they were only good at what they needed to do.
Say my name.
Now, the Google Daydream was a competitor to the Gear VR by Samsung, which is also just a phone VR, but had better support. D-tier controllers for the same reason. Also, what's with the touchpads on these VR controllers? They all suck. Getting back to 2018, Nintendo is back with a cardboard VR of their own called the Nintendo Labo that had little support after launch and sucked because again, their VR don't use head straps. And this time, there was no freaky looking controller because it was also just cardboard. It gets an F. Then also in 2018, HTC released their next headset, the HTC Vive Pro. That is just a beefed up HTC Vive and comes with an installed audio strap, but the mic still sucks though. Now the controllers weren't good before, so obviously they had to improve and make them get better. D tier. It's usable, but the trackpad is clickable, and it's now a beautiful new blue color. Now in 2019, Oculus and HTC are competing with each other by releasing a headset at the same time, with Oculus releasing the Oculus Rift S that had cameras on it to track the controllers and had a better resolution than the CV1. Then on the other side, you had the HTC Vive Pro Eye, which is the same as the Pro but had eye tracking. That could be cool if it had actual support and a better mic. But who had the better headset? Neither, because Valve came along and dropped a nuke called that clears any modern VR kit, and it has a huge field of vision with 2 great quality screens, a comfortable head strap, 2 Vive 2.0 base stations that made the tracking space bigger and wider and better, and the holy grail, the knuckles. A tier. These things are essential nowadays. They are comfortable, you don't need to hold them, and they had a joystick. And oh, did I mention the finger tracking? For all fingers, on both hands. And for the first time in history, a VR headset mic that was actually good for once. Now I didn't put the controllers into S for a reason, and I'll put the rest of the kit in A tier too, if I could do that. With the only negative of all of it being the durability. Everything has at least one major point of failure. The base stations could get the red light of death caused by a hardware malfunction. The controllers can have major drift problems or can just break near the trigger if you hit it too hard. The cable can run you about $100 if it breaks somewhere, but everything around this headset looks cool, only having 2 negatives overall, that being it's fragile and the price, which is $1,000, but in fairness, you get the best headset, controllers and base stations on the market, and it was and still is reasonable. But all VRs up until now have had that dreaded cable, but not for long, because Oculus made a standalone headset. The Oculus Quest used inside-out tracking. It's the same as the Rift S, but improved on it, making the algorithm better and having more cameras. But the real reason this headset was so good is because you didn't need a PC to play good VR games. Now, the controllers get a C, because they look weird. They're the same as the Rift S controllers. Now, this VR alone would start a chain reaction that's still going on today, because 99% of headsets nowadays are standalone, because they're more consumer friendly and they're easy to use. Then, HP want to release their own inside-out tracked headset, called the HP Reverb, having around double the resolution, and the controllers, they suck. They get a D tier. They work. I don't like them. Then HTC saw the HP Reverb and how it used inside-out tracking and wanted to have one for their own, so they made the Vive Cosmos, and it sucked bad. The Cosmos had poor tracking and completely yoinked the Oculus Quest controllers, so they get a B. Then in 2020, a certain thing happened that led for a spike in VR as everyone was bored out of their mind and was missing their precious social interactions. Now, I haven't mentioned this game up until now, and it wasn't super relevant, but it got popularized due to a meme called Ugandan Knuckles.
You don't know the way.
Yes, I do.
Do you know the way?
I know the way.
You have to have Ebola to know the way.
It came from VRChat, where you socialize with anyone from anywhere. But VRChat got a huge spike around this time, and this game will become relevant later. But by the end of 2020, a small little headset came out called... This headset was a direct upgrade. Better visuals, a better controller. It gets a B tier, by the way.
Nice job, team.
Then HP released the HP Reverb G2, which came as again with good resolutions and more expensive as it requires a PC. And the controllers.
Phineas and Ferb are dead!
Then finally, the first EASA approved VR flight simulator was made by Loft Dynamics that helped learning pilots traverse risky maneuvers in safer environments. And finally, by the end of the year, the HTC Vive Pro 2 is the best almost consumer headset, as the resolution is good, about 2K per eye, and a wide field of vision being 120 degrees. Now this is the best headset at an unreasonable price, but the mic still sucked. Then Facebook renamed themselves to Meta to push the metaverse. Now it's the metaverse era of VR, so we're getting more modern, and the VR blew up in the public consciousness with people getting Oculus Quest 2s for Christmas, and now this came with a major problem.
Boom. A child.
Now before this Christmas, VR was mostly meant for adults, as it costed money, but now you have kids and adults, and you put them together, normally that doesn't mix well. Now moving on to 2022, Meta, seeing that they have a huge market and wanted to push their own metaverse called Horizon Worlds, but they had a problem. They had competition already called VRChat, and as I mentioned earlier, it's more relevant, as VRChat has custom avatars like these. Now this comes with some problems, as if it's a 3D model that isn't legal, you can use it, so some freaks do use some freaky things. And VRChat has a lot of community made things, like games, experiences, and groups, and it's very community made. And Horizon Worlds had,
Nice job, team.
and it didn't look good from the start. But surely this AAA game made by a big company will beat the indie company to the ground. I hate indie companies. Now Horizon Worlds had something VRChat didn't. Old people. And native face tracking. Now there is no VR with native face tracking. Until the Meta Quest Pro. Now this headset was good. Like the specs were good, the resolution was good, and the controllers were an A tier. It was also a really good example of mixed reality, where it mixes 3D elements and real life playstates into a mixed game. And it was overall a really good headset. But the price was a reasonable. 2023 was when things kind of fell off VR, as there was only two notable VR headsets released, the Oculus Quest 3, which is again better performance, almost full color mixed reality, and it gets A tier controllers because it's just the Meta Quest Pros. And the PSVR 2 actually tried to be a VR, having exclusive games like Resident Evil Village VR.
What's this? That looks dribbly. What is it? What is it? What is it?
Now I would buy the PSVR 2, except I got my funny up and not my money up. And I'm not even that funny. And the controllers get an A tier. Hooray! Finally, on smaller headset news, literally the big screen beyond, that actually looks like it's from Ready Player One, and was exclusive to you, as the face mask was only meant for you. It's small, and it's almost worth the price of $1,000. Now 2024 is similar to 2023, as it has nothing super interesting, only having the Apple Vision Pro that had good displays, works in the Apple ecosystem, and had full finger tracking without having any controllers. Plus, face tracking, although it had no games, but who buys a MacBook to play games? Nobody. This headset was a great idea, because when Apple does something, it gets adopted by everyone, and gets normalized. But anyone that did buy this headset is an idiot, and lost $3,500, you're an idiot. If you wore this outside, you look like a moron, and a thief should have stole it so you can get some exposure therapy to being normal. And finally, a cheaper headset called the Quest 3 came out that had slightly worse picture quality.
Congratulations, you made it to the end of the video if you couldn't tell, so you can click off or you can listen to me. It's your choice. I just wanted to say thank you for getting through that gauntlet of a yap session. I also just wanted to add some things. Sorry again for the poor mic quality. I have this one from AliExpress. It's really bad, but I'm planning on replacing it soon. Another thing, I completely forgot to mention Pimax, but they're saying they're going to make a headset, but then nothing ever happens, so I just never mentioned them because of that. If you couldn't tell from the video, I really like Ultra Kill. I don't know if you could tell, I just had to tell it directly. And also shout out to the Snicky because they wanted one. And
In life, there's roadblocks.